I'm Claudia.
I'm Danny.
And I'm Ranjani.
We're representing the University of Chicago in Columbia Econ Review's Environmental Policy Competition for 2016.
We have selected Indiana as our target state. Recent scientific evidence has shown that the burning of large amounts of fossil fuels have increased the concentration of atmospheric carbon in the Earth's atmosphere. Such high levels of carbon dioxide have also been shown to contribute to global warming, and such effects will especially be felt in the state of Indiana. Global warming trends will increase the frequency and the intensity of the lake effect in the Great Lakes region. The lake effect involves the northwestern region of the lake being drier and the southeastern region of the Great Lakes being wetter. However, with increased temperatures, this cycle will get increasingly aggravated. However, increased temperatures will also create an imbalance between the evaporation and precipitation cycles in the Great Lakes region, in which overall the lake will receive less precipitation. Such precipitation changes could decrease the lake's water level by up to 2.5 meters. This decrease in water level would have catastrophic effects on many of Indiana's industries. For example, this great decrease in water level in the Great Lakes would put a great strain upon Indiana's water supply, in which the state would struggle to compete for even smaller amounts of water resources. In addition, these drier conditions would also force Indiana farmers to rely on more extensive irrigation systems, which would thus putting greater pressure on the already diminished Great Lakes water supply in order to supply an adequate amount of water to their crops. In addition, if such irrigation patterns are proven to be ineffective, this would decrease the crop yield of Indiana's agricultural industry tremendously, thus imposing a huge blow upon the industry itself.
The Clean Power Plan is the Environmental Protection Agency's policy to combat anthropogenic climate change. It was written in 2014. The Federal Clean Power Plan functions as a framework for state-specific environmental regulation. The overall goal of the plan is to reduce emissions by the year 2030. The plan reduces emissions in each state by asking that the state improve the efficiency of existing coal plants and invest in zero-carbon energy to ultimately phase out non-renewables. Each state has to write its own plan within the Clean Power Plan, and the Clean Power Plan presents each state with the option of choosing either mass-based or rate-based goals for emissions reductions. Mass-based goals are measured in total short tons of CO2 emitted. Rate-based goals are measured in the amount of emissions per unit of electricity generated. Indiana receives 85% of its electricity from coal. Governor Mike Pence of Indiana has decided to sue the EPA over the Clean Power Plan on the basis that it will result in economic deprivation and job loss throughout the state. The following proposal is a Clean Power Plan for Indiana that addresses the concerns of the dissenting opinions, while at the same time remaining loyal to the goals of the Clean Power Plan, which are to reduce emissions in the state of Indiana.
The first part of our plan involves reducing carbon emissions from the existing coal-fired power plants. For example, burning pulverized coal at high temperatures and pressures have been shown to increase the efficiency of coal plants by up to 35%. In addition, coal-fired power plants could implement technologies that seek to sequester carbon. Gaseous carbon emissions can be trapped by amines as they leave emission towers. The amines can be stripped from the carbon emissions by using large amounts of supercritically heated steam.
So in order to encourage coal companies to invest more into their renewable energy sectors, we want to enforce a sort of progressive tax-like energy incentive. So based on the magnitude of net profit margin that a coal company makes, we're going to have a sliding tax scale of how much money they're going to have to put into their renewable energy sectors. So if their net profit margin is negative 25% to 0%, the company will be asked to invest 4.5% of the total profit into their renewable energy sectors. For companies that make 0% to 5% as their net profit margin, they'll be asked to invest 6% of their total profit into the renewable energy sectors. For companies that make 5 to 10% as their net profit margin, they'll be investing 7%, and the scale increases to a total of, if companies are making more than 25% as their net profit margin, they'll be asked to invest 10% of their total profit into the renewable energy sector. In order to ensure that coal companies are actually complying with this incentive system, there will be a related incentive and regulation for commercial industry companies to utilize a percentage of their energy as renewable energy sources, which will be described in the next part of the policy as well. Coal companies aren't going to comply with this regulation. They'll have to submit a detailed explanation of why the failure occurred and a proposed plan to pay off the debt from the missed payment of the current year, along with a fine for the amount of the missed payment from the current year as well. The goal of this simple system is to ensure that there is an incentive to invest money into the renewable energy sectors and relatively little punishment for failing. Part B of our policy plan, which deals mostly with the industrial companies. So according to the environmental protection agencies, industries contribute to 77% of total coal-based energy consumption. In order to reduce the dependence of industries on coal-based electricity, all companies in Indiana will be required to increase the percentage of energy sourced from renewable energy sources. In this case, renewable energy can be defined as solar, wind, geothermal, or hydropower energy. This energy percentage quota will be reinforced based on an increasing scale over a period of 30 to eventually 100 years. The goal is that eventually in 2050, 30% of companies' total energy consumption will come from renewable energy sources. Eventually, in 2100, we predict that 85% of energy should be sourced from renewable energy sources by these companies. So based on the transition expected in Part A by the coal-based companies investing in their own renewable energy sectors, it is expected that the price of renewable energy will decrease by 20 to 40%. The positive incentive for investing in renewable energy is based on a sliding inverse tax scale. This tax scale operates on a system of inflation and deflation. So if the company does not meet the renewable energy use percentage standards for the year, they'll be charged additional fees proportional to the difference of the standard not met, in addition to submitting a plausible explanation as similar to Part A. However, if they exceed these standards and decide to use more renewable energy than is required, they'll be rewarded with a tax credit. So for example, from the years 2020 to 2023, companies will be asked to make sure that 3% of their total energy consumption comes from renewable energy sources. From 2024 to 2027, 6% of the total energy consumption should be from renewable energy sources. Over a period of years, the number will keep increasing up till eventually, from 2040 to 2049, the total energy consumption, 22% of the total energy consumption should come from renewable energy sources. Eventually, by 2050, it should be 30%, and 2100 should be 85%.
This is Part C of our policy, which deals with progress checks. This chart shows the EPA's suggestion for emission reductions in Indiana. The period of time in which the policy operates is divided into 3 interim periods, namely from 2022 to 2024, from 2024 to 2027, and from 2027 to 2029. In the chart, these are referred to as interim period 1, interim period 2, and interim period 3, respectively. This policy will initially use both the EPA's suggested statewide goals and a set of individual holistic rate-based goals that will be determined by looking at each specific plan's infrastructure, resources, and customers. Every year, a statewide progress check will be carried out, with more detailed progress checks carried out at the end of each interim period. The yearly progress checks will determine whether the state's rate-based goals are being met as a whole, and if the statewide goal is not being met, it will require a progress report and a penalty payment for every power plant that does not meet its specific rate-based goals. The percentage will range depending on various factors, such as how far from the emissions reduction goal the plant was at the time of the progress check, the plant's implementation of pollution mitigation technology, and the resources the plant had to try to achieve these goals. The determination of what penalty will be is holistic, and this penalty is not intended to hinder the economic success of the power plant. Instead, it should serve as an incentive for the power plant to take the emission reduction goals seriously. Finally, an important aspect of Part C of our policy is that it makes the policy flexible. The yearly progress checks will be an opportunity for the policy to be improved upon and readdressed.
Part D of our plan involves promoting the renewable energy industry in Indiana. First, any revenue made off non-compliance penalties from the coal industry will be reinvested into the renewable energy industry. Two, a percentage of revenue already made off the Indiana tax code will be invested in the renewable energy industry in order to promote the development and creation and implementation of new technologies. Third, tax credits will be provided to renewable energy companies. These tax credits involve the implementation of a lower tax bracket to renewable energy companies that demonstrate a considerable effort to develop, create, and implement new technologies in the renewable energy industry.
Part E of our plan deals with two things: the increased utility costs associated with renewable energy and the concern that this plan will result in job loss. The EPA estimates that monthly utility costs will only increase by as much as 3% in 2020, and that the monthly cost of utilities will actually decrease by 9% by 2030 if the Clean Power Plan is carried out. Though those who are able to afford the temporary 3% increase in utility will be expected to do so, a low-income utility program will be implemented that provides fixed discounts and caps on utility rates for the low-income communities in Indiana. Another concern that has fueled the campaign against the Clean Power Plan in Indiana is that there will be a significant job loss associated with the plan. According to a recent study, however, the renewable energy sector has the capability of employing 3 times more people per unit of electricity produced than the non-renewable sector. The total number of coal-related jobs in Indiana is 29,163. This includes both mining and power plant jobs. Since Indiana will gradually phase out of coal, those working in coal-related jobs will have the option of transitioning their work to renewable energy jobs. Any renewable energy plant, project, or company will be required to look for employees in the pool of existing coal employees. This should help mitigate the job loss associated with this plan. In the long run, we believe that this plan will create more jobs because the renewable energy sector in Indiana will ultimately increase.
In order to determine both the positive and negative effects that our proposed policy has on the economy of Indiana, we're going to compare the results of the policy to the EPA's currently suggested Clean Power Plan. Currently, coal contributes to 84% of electricity use in Indiana. The Clean Power Plan proposes that CO2 emissions should be reduced by 20% by 2030, leading to an annual average price increase of 20% for electricity. However, in our plan, we propose that although the annual decrease in total emissions should still remain at approximately 20%, we propose that companies should invest 6 to 10% of profit in the renewable energy sectors, providing more free cash flow for the sectors, which can potentially lead to a decrease in the price of renewable energy for consumers due to both higher demand and the higher ability for a larger supply as well. Thus, we only predict for there to be a 3% increase in the price of electricity for consumers, as stated by an analysis done by the EPA. In the near future, although we do expect a net increase in consumer spending, it is predicted that as consumers shift more to renewable energy sources for electricity, and as demand and supply increase, the net price decrease will slowly converge to 9% in the next 50 to 100 years, taking inflation into consideration. In terms of companies in the industrial sector, with the currently proposed power plan, industries only incur an 8% increase in electricity payment prices, which is relatively low compared to similar coal-dependent states, such as Texas, which experiences a 64% increase, Wyoming with a 34% increase, Illinois with a 27% increase, and even New Mexico with a 13% increase. Aside from an overview of the changes that industries will incur as a whole, if emissions are not reduced, and temperature continues to change due to unmitigated global warming, by 2100 the global GDP is projected to be 23% lower than the current state.
Perhaps the biggest constraints that this plan faces politically are the apparent risk of job loss for coal plant workers and the influence of fossil fuel companies lobbying on Indiana's elected officials. The plan considers workers' interests by introducing a comprehensive method for transitioning 26,000 plus coal jobs to renewable jobs between 2022 and 2030. The influence of fossil fuel money in Indiana government, however, is far more complex. This will be a bigger obstacle to the success of this plan. Governor Mike Pence's decision to sue the EPA seems to be a result of the influence of fossil fuel lobbying on Indiana's government. Along with many politicians throughout the United States, Pence received considerable campaign donations from utility and coal companies. Received from these companies were $488,000 from Indiana Michigan Power, $408,000 from Duke Energy, and almost $300,000 from Vectrum. There is no doubt that these companies will use their financial resources to fight against any environmental legislation in the state of Indiana, because at times environmental regulation has gone against their own interests. For this reason, this plan has decisively avoided an increase in taxes for utility and fossil fuel companies. Instead, the plan proposes the sliding inverse tax scale for renewable energy in order to give utility and fossil fuel companies a continued share of the energy sector, even as non-renewable energy is phased out in Indiana.